if it's only calling one database field, don't be afraid to group by that formula, because what that allows you to do is modify how the report is grouped without having to delete and recreate the group itself by simply editing the code of the underlying formula. Okay, very good. So let's look at parameters with multiple values. In this case, what I want to do, what we'll do is we'll select on state. So you see here that I actually have both New York and Pennsylvania states in my database with a collection of some blanks. So what we want the end user to be able to do is select a list of states that they would like to see on the report. So let's look at what parameters we have going on here. Actually, I already have one, which I'll delete because I want to recreate that for you. So again, we want to create a parameter on state. So let's right-click our parameters and select New. I'm just going to call this State, which is our friendly name. The prompting text is actually what the end user is going to see, so it doesn't hurt to be verbose here, so please select a state. And the value type is a string being a piece of text. And here's where we're going to get fancy. We're going to enable this Allow Multiple Values checkbox. And we're even going to go a step further. We're going to go ahead and set up the default values for this. And what's nice about Crystal is that if within this default values dialog, if I browse out to the field that is ultimately going to get this value, in our case state, I select it from here, and what it does is it lists all of the unique values, and I can go ahead and I can just add all of those to the end user's drop down very easily. Now that I have a state parameter, I go ahead and I preview. Okay, so how come I'm getting all states? It didn't ask me for states. How come it's not asking me for states? I'm sure you already know, but for those of you that might not, creating the parameter isn't enough. You also need to make that parameter part of your selection criteria. And we do that by going to Report and down to Select Expert. So right here we can see that there is no selection criteria defined for this report as of yet. So let's go ahead and actually I'm going to recommend that whenever you work with a Select Expert, you are Crystal experts. So go right to Show Formula and then go right to Formula Editor, because being able to edit the selection criteria as a formula, which is ultimately what it is, provides you with the most flexibility. So in this case, keep in mind what we're doing. We want our state to be equal to our parameter that the end user selects. So it's easy as saying state is equal to my state parameter, prefixed by a question mark. It's just how Crystal writes them. I go ahead and I save and I hit OK all the way back out. Now if I go to preview, now we're getting the enter parameter values dialog. So in this case, the end user would go ahead and list through their list of available states and say, okay, I want to look at PA, and I want to look at New York, and maybe I want to look at Alabama, so on and so forth. What's nice about using the multiple element parameter type is that the end user can add as many items to this list as they want. And when you go to plug stuff into your Select Expert, you only have to use the field once. Do you see that? Very handy, very nice. So now my report is returning both PA and New York. You'll notice that it's dropped off the blanks, which of course is kind of according to design, because the report's only giving me what I ask it for. Now here's the problem. When I go to insert my state parameter on my report title, because let me tell you what, every good report has a title. And that is mostly for your benefit. Because if you're an active Crystal developer, you probably have a lot of different reports around, a lot of different things going on. So I personally like to at least have a title block on the first page, and most importantly, what I like to have within my title block is my print date, available from my special fields here. So I always know when the report was printed. Very important if I'm actively making changes to a report. Yesterday's report might not be working just like today's report. And of course, what I really want to do within my title area is list the parameters that the end user has selected. Very important. And if I drag my state parameter in, and I go to preview it, it's incomplete. Even though we just selected 3 states, New York, PA, and Alabama, it's only showing me the first item that I picked. So we need to be able to actually extract the values from that multiple element parameter, and that's actually pretty easy to do. Matter of fact, I already have it here. I'm going to go ahead and delete it. I'm going to make a new formula. This is going to be my state list. And the way you break out multiple values from a multiple element parameters, you use actually, I always thought in my mind it would be called the split function, right? No, as a matter of fact, it's called the join function. And when we join things together, and actually I'm going to cheat right now. I'm going to go back to the Crystal blog at Mark's group, and I'm just going to cheat and look at my source code, and here it is. I join my field name and then a delimiter. So that's the way it's going to work. So it's going to be join, and then I want to join the values out of my state parameter, and I want them to be delimited by a comma and then a space. You can always check your syntax by checking that little X2 guy right there. And I hit save, and now I can drag my state list right underneath my broken one. You see, now I'm getting the entire list of my multiple elements, and all that was using the join function within a formula. I joined the values out of my parameter, delimited by a comma and then a space. You see, if I omit that space, it doesn't look right. It looks crowded. So also, much in the same vein, if we're using a date range, which is extremely useful in Crystal. So let's imagine we want to gather out a range of contact records created based upon that create on date. So what we're going to do now, delete my date range parameter. I'm going to create a new parameter, and we're going to call this creation range. And now, instead of allowing multiple values, which I guess wouldn't necessarily be useful on a date-based parameter, we're going to actually use a range. And when we do that, when we use the range, and actually we need to add the parameter to our select expert now before we can see how it prompts us. The best thing about using a range date parameter is that you don't have to evaluate it using greater than and less than. You can say in. So not only should my state be in my list of state or equal to my list of states, my create on date should be in my range. There it is. Got lost there for a second. Oh, you know why that is? Okay, here's the problem. Crystal's saying, hey, you need to have a date time there. So that's not a date time. So I'm thinking to myself, oh, am I going crazy? Is that not the case? But it's absolutely correct. If I go back to my parameter, it's a string, and that's the default type. So I need to change that to a date. Very important, very important. So certainly when I'm using dates, I want to make sure that my value type is a date. And that allows me to do things easily with dates in formulas. So I'm going to say, and my create on date should be in my creation range. And that should work. Yay! Okay, so now when I preview, this is what a range parameter looks like. I have just a start and an end. So in this case, because I know there's records in December of 2010, we're going to use that. Between December 1st and today, we'll say. All right, so What's nice about using the range is that the end user can provide both values here, and your selection criteria is very streamlined and very simple. So now all three things have to be true. The state has to be New York, PA, or Alabama, and my creation date has to be greater than December of 2010. And it has to have a state. You'll notice I had 2 December records before. One has dropped off. I'm almost going to guarantee it's because the state was blank. However, you run into the same kind of problem with your range parameter. If I drag that onto the report, it doesn't show me anything. I don't even get the starting date. So what you actually have to do is create 2 formulas. One for the beginning of the range and one for the ending of the range. And this is how it's going to work. I'm going to create my first one as range begin. And in order to pull out the smallest value from a range, you actually use the minimum function. And I grab the minimum out of my creation range, which grabs the lowest date within the range, which is how that works. So there's my range begin, and then I need a range end. And now I'm going to use conversely the maximum function to pull the maximum value out of my creation range. So now I can drag these values into my title, and I can see the date range the end user actually selected. So I'm going to drag my range begin and my range ending. And there we have it. A cleaner way to do it, instead of using these 2 items here, now that we have our 2 formulas, we can actually add a third unified formula just as our text object and say, call this the whole date range. And we can actually add our other formulas within this formula. So we can say it's going to be our range begin plus 2, oops, and single quotes, 2, double, range ending. And what that does, or what it should do rather, let me hold my breath here. Yeah, what it does is that gives us both values in one easy to move and use object. And certainly we can go back in there, and you'll notice here that I'm using the ampersand as a concatenation operator, which just adds this little piece of text between the 2 values, so we can simply put the word 2 in there and save it. And there you go. So at this point, I'd kind of like to open it up to questions, should you guys have any.